So I was diagnosed with diabetes on November 3rd, 2012. So I just recently had my 10-year anniversary. I had just turned 14, so I was an eighth grader. It was a unique experience because I didn't know anyone that had diabetes. And so I came back to school and after maybe like a week and a half in the hospital, or, some days at home too, learning how to insulin and how to diabetes. And I came back and I went straight to the nurse's office and kind of, explained everything. And they were like, oh, okay, good to know. And I walked out and I found a friend in the hallway and she was like, dude, where you been? And I was like, well, I was diagnosed with diabetes and I was crying at that point because I hadn't had to tell anyone yet. I definitely had the symptoms. So when I was in eighth grade at the time, I was maybe like 100 pounds soaking wet. And so I lost, I think like 20 pounds-ish in about a month and a half. And so I went from a normal normal body to, where your rib cage comes together. I could put my thumb into where the rib cage connects like this, and it was perfectly flesh. Like my thumb could fit in there, which was terrifying. Other than that, I experienced a lot of hair loss. My skin kind of had a tinge of gray. I just didn't look well. I looked very sick, and I was constantly lethargic, and I was peeing a lot and so thirsty. Imagine the greatest thirst you've ever had, and that's where I was at every single day. Like every hour of the day. I'm very school-oriented, type A kind of, I love education and learning. So I was never that kind of kid that, skipped out on a class, anything like that. But I started to have to go to the bathroom once or twice during a single class period. And my teachers were like, you can't go, like stop roaming the halls. I was like, no, I'm gonna pee myself. Like it's either happening here or I'm going to the bathroom. Like, I don't know what to say. And then I remember my bus ride home was about 25 minutes. And specifically on that bus ride, I would pee right before I had to get on the bus. And then I would get on the bus. And by the time I got back to my house, I was sprinting to the bathroom. I didn't walk home with my friends anymore. I got off the bus and sprinted. So it was really sad. November 3rd is when I was diagnosed. November 3rd is when I went to the ER. No diabetics around us. No one in my family with diabetes at all. And so we didn't really understand what was going on. And so he said, you have type 1 diabetes. You'll never again have a perfect record of health. And with that, he walked out. And I was just like, okay. So I started on insulin injections. So I was using pens, not syringes. It was a learning experience, but I had nano needles at the time. And so just the tiniest needles because I was tiny myself. And I was on insulin pens. So I had two pens. I had a fast acting and a long acting, Novolog and Lantus. So I would take the fast acting form of insulin with all of my meals / for blood sugar correction. And then I would take the long acting once a day in the evening, specifically at 8 p.m. My dad would give it to me, and in return, I would give him a hug. For my next pageant, I was like, yes, this is the week I'm going to try a new insulin pump. Of course, if you're not set up for success with an insulin pump, it's not going to go well. And it didn't. And so in between being on stage at a certain point, I was in a changing room or something. I ripped the pump off and I said, I'm never doing this again. And I went back to shots for years. Well, it turns out I just needed some things to help me through that. One, pockets. Two, knowing how to actually put it on, take it off, instead of the stress of doing that in a really stressful environment anyways. But that is why I didn't use my pump for a while. I have been on the Tandem T-Slim X2. Now I have the Control IQ, which is really cool. So basically it will kind of help me with my blood sugar. If I'm going high, it gives me a little bit of correction for me. And then if I'm going low, it'll shut off my basal deliveries. So I don't have any underlying insulin coming in. But it's a really, really great tool and resource. I will never go back to injections now. I have had to here and there if the pump breaks or anything like that. I think that identifying the negatives can really help us be appreciative of everything that we have and everything that we need, look forward to all of that. So yes, it had a negative impact. Back in the day, let's say 10-ish years ago, I would cry if anyone asked me about it. They were like, "Oh, you have diabetes." And like, don't talk to me about it. And so I was just very sad and very lost, confused, embarrassed, frustrated. Why me? All of that kind of stuff. So I think at first it had a negative impact on my outlook on life because I do still consider myself unlucky lucky, but I think more lucky than not. So for example, I think back when I was 14, again, just being 14, the two ways that it had a significant impact that first year, I was really hurt that it was me. Fun fact, I'm a triplet, so I have two brothers, and I was so mad at the world. I was like, you had three of us to pick from. Why did you pick me? And that's obviously not how it works. But the other thing I think that happened that year is, so I was in middle school, like I said, and so we had PE classes, physical ed, and during that year specifically, that 8th grade year in that school system, so like I said, I grew up active duty, so I lived all across the country, but that few years we were in Virginia, and in the school systems, we were required to watch Super Size Me. It's a really interesting documentary, but the thing that I will never forget from that documentary is that there was a statistic thrown in there, and it said on average diabetics lose approximately 7 years of their life compared to people who are not diabetic. I shot up from my chair, ran outside crying. My brother came after me. He was in the same class, so that was really lucky for me. Little did I know that type 1 and type 2 are very different. They weren't actually talking about type 1. And now, of course, it makes sense looking back on it. It was talking about, obesity. It was talking about all of these like key indicators of type 2, but I just didn't know. And so when he said diabetes, I was like, that's me. Okay. So that was definitely really kind of a negative impact. And I really had a lot of, maybe not a lot, like a small fear of dying all the time for a little bit until I realized what they were actually saying in that documentary. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to be okay. But then I also realized, well, it's directly about how I take care of myself. So as long as I'm taking my insulin, as long as I'm being proactive, then I'm going to be okay. Sometimes I get a little bit of burnout. I think everyone does. The interesting thing is that it's not ever usually related to work, because I work with diabetes pretty much all day, every day. Right. And it's never really that. It's usually just my own self of what's going on, or if I have something happening or something's going weird, because, I have the education, I have the smarts, but of course I can't say my blood sugar is perfect. I don't know that any of us diabetics could, otherwise we might not be diabetic, right? So I've made so many friends. I've had so many cool experiences. I make a lot of diabetes jokes, and it's kind of allowed me to connect with people in different ways. And of course, not with just a stranger, but for those who know me and for those who I know, we joke with each other, and I think it's a great way to kind of make light of the situation. I think the other positive impacts, it gave me a career. It showed me that this is exactly what I want to be doing. Diabetes kind of spiraled into everything that I am and everything that I do. It gave me awesome things to focus on in college. It gave me awesome things to talk about with professors. Overall, it's been more of a positive, although sometimes it's a little bit difficult. Overall, it's been a really, really awesome experience. And as long as I'm seeing it as something to be grateful for, then I think that it will continue to have a positive impact on me. Yeah, it has definitely morphed over the years. I love this question. I have become so much more confident and comfortable. First of all, I think that my academic background really aids me in my confidence with talking about diabetes. Distant friends and family, yes, absolutely. I also feel confident with anyone I'm around. Like, hey guys, just so you know, I'm diabetic. If I beep or if I need to do something, please forgive me. Something else too is I have an Apple Watch, so I get my blood sugar on my Apple Watch. And so I kind of have a habit of just checking it and like seeing where my blood sugar's at. So pump aside, because that was kind of hidden anyways. When I started wearing my continuous glucose monitor, I was a junior in high school. Like I said, I went to high school in San Diego, sunny San Diego. My school was outside. We didn't really have AC. So it was a super cool school, by the way, but it was warm. So, I would often wear shorts and a short sleeve t-shirt or tank top. We didn't have a crazy dress code, so kind of anything was fine, especially in that heat. So I started wearing the Dexcom when it was still warm, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm committing to long sleeves for the rest of my life. No, absolutely not. So maybe for like the first 5 days, I wore long sleeves, and people were like, "Are you okay?"
Yeah.
I was like, anyways, I started wearing short sleeves, and people would be like, "Oh, hey, like, cool." It's like, okay, thanks. Like, and so I quickly got a lot of confidence from that. And then shortly after, I started to do those competitions where I was tracking my diabetes and tracking my input or intake, my output, all that kind of stuff. So I specifically was looking at how different types of carbohydrates and protein macros affect my blood sugar and spiking, and that's how I learned about pre-bolusing, and that's how I learned about this and that, and all of the essential things that you have to know. I have so many people come up to me and they'll be like, "What's on your arm?" I'm like, "Oh, it's a continuous glucose monitor. I'm diabetic." And they're like, "Well, you're not fat." I'm like, "Thank you for noticing." Fun fact, there are multiple kinds of diabetes, and not all diabetics are the same. And you can have, a diabetic, a type 1 who's larger or smaller, and you can have a type 2 who's larger or smaller. It doesn't just relate to your body size. And people will be like, "Oh, well, you can't eat sugar anymore, can you?" I'm like, fun fact about that as well. At least my personal philosophy and kind of how I function in my profession is, I think that we should live our life and incorporate diabetes. I don't want us to be overrun by diabetes and try to incorporate our life. So if I want cake, I'm going to eat cake. What does that mean though? I just have to be smart about portion size, carb counting, pre-bolusing, all of the strategies that we've learned, because I want to be able to live that full life, but not and not sacrifice anything. But of course, not also sacrifice my health because I'm living that full life. So it's kind of a give and take, but I think ultimately just having smart management is the key. Absolutely. Especially as it relates to people with diabetes. Diabetes education is very important. But then, of course, general public education can be very helpful. I think that just a greater mindfulness in general with everything, not just diabetes, but other medical concerns, other generic needs, those can be very. I think that the world would be a lot better if we had a lot more understanding and kindness behind a lot of what we don't right now. So type 1 doesn't necessarily create insulin, so they need insulin, hence the external insulin shots, pumps. Type 2, more insulin resistance, so that's really the lifestyle factors, some of those oral medications. So that's kind of how I start with describing the difference between type 1 and type 2, explaining diabetes in general. And then I think from there, if I had to say anything else, it would maybe kind of go back to some of my philosophy on diabetes and I guess the combination of diabetes, dietetic, and lifestyle. It doesn't mean that we can't live a truly full, wonderful, beautiful, colorful life. We just have to be a little bit more mindful and make some extra choices. It's the same as, maybe not exactly the same, but if someone has an allergy, it's not like they don't eat, they just have to be mindful of the thing specifically that they can't eat. Or if someone has a physical limitation, well, they can't necessarily go in the building. They just maybe need to find a ramp to get in there instead of using the stairs. So it's not anything that has to stop us from living our life to the fullest. And I think we can do anything that we set our minds to as long as we do it smart and do it well.